The level of color in hair. We've got to understand what's in hair before we change the color to something else. So we want to talk about the composition of the hair and how it's arranged. And then we'll get to the chemical composition of our artificial hair colors. So the first thing we want to talk about is hair texture. What is hair texture? Classified as either fine, medium, or coarse. What does that mean?
It means it's the diameter of the hair.
It's the diameter of the hair shaft. And when we think of hair, we usually like to think, and we're thinking along the lines of we're going to change her color, we like to think of what color is it. But if we talk about medium brown is going to be different on fine hair than it is on coarse hair. Why?
Because the pigment in it is tighter.
The pigment in it is tighter. It's going to appear darker, although for our artificial color purposes, it would not be darker. So if we have fine hair that is medium brown and coarse hair that is medium brown, we have the same amount of pigment granules in it. This being your fine hair. The pigment granules are tightly compacted in it. And then we take medium hair, has the same amount of granules, but it's going to appear a little bit lighter because we see that we have more space between the granules. And then if we take coarse hair, it's going to appear even lighter. But we would still use the same product to take either one of these from medium brown to blonde, because that is the pigment colors there. The next thing we're going to talk about is density of the hair. What is density?
The number of hairs per square inch.
Number of hairs per square inch. How does that have a bearing on the color that the hair appears to be?
Well, if you have a lot of hairs together, wouldn't it appear maybe darker than if you have...
It's going to appear darker. The light cannot get through it very good. What about the porosity of the hair? What is that and what role does it play? We say water, but
absorb anything.
any moisture whatsoever. It's the ability of the hair to absorb moisture. What role do you think that's going to play in coloring hair?
You leave the color on.
How long you leave it on?
How well it gets into the hair.
How well it will get into the hair.
What kind of color do you use?
What kind of color to use? What level? So here's what happens with porosity. If the hair is really resistant, and we want to go back and remember about how the hair is made. Medulla on the inside, it plays no part in our chemical services, and most hair, especially fine to normal hair, does not have it. It's covered with the cortex, and that's where our pigment or melanin granules are located. And then the outer layer of it is the cuticle scales or imbrications, just like scales on a fish bag. So when somebody has high porosity, that means the cuticle scales are standing wide open. And the hair has high porosity. So high is not a good thing here. It's not like a high grade. And what happens, our color can go right in. And it can go right in and attack our melanin granules, our pigment. And it can deposit a lot quicker. So we may wind up with a lot darker result on high porosity than we would on somebody that's cuticle scales are down tight, because our chemical is going to take time to open those cuticle scales to get into our natural coloring matter. Also, on the flip side of that, it winds up darker, but it gives it up faster because there's no cuticle scales there. They are already opened and damaged. There's no cuticle scales there to hold the artificial color we have. And that's often what happens to our reds, especially that fade easily. So we got to take into consideration porosity when we decide what color or how we're going to color it. The confusing thing about it is, how do we decide all of these factors about the hair that's on the head? Remembering that the natural hair color is half of our formulation when we are, even if we're darkening hair. Because we've got to remember this rule. If we've got medium brown hair and we put medium brown on it, those two colors together are going to give us what? Real dark brown, because we're putting color on color. We have always been accustomed to taking a white sheet of paper and putting color on it, and the color winds up exactly what we put on there. But now we're going to be putting colors together. And when we deposit one over the other, we wind up with a darker result. So the first thing we've got to do is decide what is her color, what is the porosity, what is the density, and what is the texture. So how do we do that?
Client consultation.
During the client consultation. But where is a good place to look? We want to look and feel.
Look over here.
The shampoo bowl.
In the back area. Why the back area? It's going to be thicker. It's covered up more. So what we're going to do is take an area in the crown and we're going to try to get where there's some natural light so it doesn't influence the color of the hair at all, so we can see. We're going to hold up just small pieces of it so we can look through it and see what we see. Because not only are we concerned with exactly what we see, when we first put color on, it's going to begin to remove a little bit of that natural color, even if we're using a darker shade, because remember, hydrogen peroxide lightens, whether we're trying to lighten the hair or not. That's one of the first processes it does. So we want to see through that hair and see the underlying pigment. What is underlying pigment or contributing pigment? How does it differ from what we see as we look at the head, or the hair that's on the head now? Might it have more tone to it? That's when we begin to see tones more than levels. Is that where we see our oranges? As we begin to lift color, if somebody wants to go to a lighter shade, the first thing we're going to see as it begins to lift is a contributing pigment, which means that's what we've got to deal with. And we'll discuss that a whole lot more when we go into tonal values. But you're going to see your warmth or coolness. It's caused by eumelanin or pheomelanin. Is that correct? What is eumelanin?
It's the melanin that gives black and brown color.
It's the melanin that gives black and brown color. So what is pheomelanin? Blonde. But doesn't most heads contain a little of each?
Mm-hmm.
So our contributing pigment is the pigment that lies under the natural hair color, but we've got to take it into consideration because in the first 5 minutes of application we're going to begin to see that. So we want to understand it before we apply a color, because if she's wanting to go to something that doesn't have red in it and you see through there that you can see some orange or red, then that tells you that you've got to use an ash tone or a cool tone to counteract or to neutralize each other. What is intensity of color?
The richness of it, like
The strength of the color.
The strength, the depth, the richness, all of those things. Let's look here and see if we can see the difference in the intensities of color.
Well, I know the first line looks more ashy than the second row.
Right. Let's look at our reds. They're usually a good giveaway from it. And this one might be a little better here to show. She comes in and says she wants red hair. What is the difference in this red? And this would actually be in the red stage, but we'll stay right here. What is the difference in this one and this one?
It's got more purple in it.
Is it darker? Are they both red?
Yeah.
They're both red. But one is more intense or has more depth than the other. This is why we do the consultation to find out what red she wants. She might actually want red blonde, and if we put this on there, we're going to have an unhappy customer. So we want to understand the intensities. We want to understand the intensity of her color that she has now. Hers is much more intense than hers. And yet we can see some of the same color there. So it goes right back to the color chart. We can also look at the Clairol chart. Now I've got out several because I want you to become familiar with how different companies do their charts. Look at your reds here. And look at this red. How much difference. It's not very intense here, is it? Very pretty though. That's very intense. So you understand what intensity is? All right. Artificial hair colors are always developed from your primaries and secondary colors that form base colors. Your base color is the predominant tonality. So what are our primary colors?
Red, yellow,
Red, yellow, and blue. What are our secondary colors then?
green, violet,
And orange. Secondary colors are made when you put two primaries together. Red and yellow make orange secondary. Red and blue make violet or purple, if we call it sometime, which is your secondary color. Blue and yellow make green. So that's your tonalities. So we want to identify the natural level and the natural tone. So right now I want to talk to you a little bit about levels. Level is usually from 1 to 10. Which one is the darkest? 1. That is as dark as it gets. 10 is the lightest. But a lot of our companies are going to an 11. Why is that?
they want platinum.
They want platinum or almost white. But for our professional purposes, we're going to only use 1 through 10. But we want to be aware that some different companies have 11 on there for somebody that wants a lot of lift. Now, I want you to know that all number 1s do not look just alike because we're going from 1 to 10. So the darkest is here on 1. And as we move towards 2, that darkness gets a little lighter. And then when we get in 2, we've got the darkest there, and it begins to get a little lighter because it's getting close to 3. And then 3 lightens up as it gets close to 4. So everybody that's a 1 does not have the exact same color hair. So Color has nicely put it on our charts. And this is no tones. This is not meant to show tones. That's why it's only a number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, on up to 10. Or with them on up to 11. And somebody has messed us up and put 10 and 11 in the wrong places. But if you'll notice, there's no tone allowed there. And I know there's no tone because every company identifies their tone with a letter. And that's what makes it easy for us to keep up whenever we're choosing levels. We first decide what level is this hair she has, what level does she want to go to. Then we decide what tone or base color does she have and what tone does she want to go to. That's where our color wheel comes in really good. And Clairol even included us a color wheel on the back of their chart. If she's warm and wants to go cool, all you've got to do is look at the color wheel. Where is warm? Over here. Which warm is it? Is it orange? Is it red? Is it yellow? And whichever one we decide, all we got to do is go right opposite. And it will tell us what to use. Ash, green. Okay? Today we're mostly concentrating on level. So I wanted you to know that you see no identifiers here except for level. This is what you take off and compare with your client's hair to see if she's that level. Don't worry about the warmth there or the coolness there. Is this the level she is? All right, we understand level? We're going to go into tone later. Now, here's another problem we have with level. We have our client who has gray hair. And somebody doesn't wake up one morning and all their hair turns gray. If they did, it would be lovely for us because gray hair accepts any color you choose. Come here and choose a color and put it on there, and gray accepts it. Just like the white paper would accept the red crayon. But that it doesn't occur. And up until she gets about 30% gray, she's not going to worry a whole lot about it, or he's not going to worry a whole lot about it. But once they cross that line, because it looks a little bit frosted, you know, and everybody's putting a little blonde in their hair today, and oftentimes when they get to 20% or close to 30%, they'll go to the hairdresser and say, put me a few blonde streaks in here so this gray doesn't show. That's not a problem, but once they reach 50% or more, then if you put blonde in there, they become totally gray blonde, and it begins to agitate them a little more. And we've got to consider gray in our formulation because we got 9,000 hairs here that's gray and 20,000 that's dark brown. And we know that our color levels are going to react different on the gray than they are on the dark brown. So how do we decide which one we're going to call our natural color? Because we can't just pick the gray hairs out and put one color on them and the dark hairs and put one color. So how do we determine which one we're going to use as our basis for choosing a color? The gray or the dark brown?
The dark brown.
The dark brown if they're 30% gray, because we still have a larger percentage of pigmented hair. But after we cross the line of 50% of gray, then we have to consider it more and what's going to occur with it. All right. Do you have questions about level? Do you notice on the other colors too, even though they've got an identifier as A, CG, RR, that they still have that number? That number is still consistent. Let's look at a 5RR, and this is red wine. It is still the level, or the same level as just our plain level 5. Hard to tell that. But if you think about the level, the lightness or darkness is still the same. And if I put another color close to this, you can tell it's still the same. And here's how. Take an 8 now and put side of this 5. Can you tell there's a difference in the lightness or darkness? So the level is going to be consistent, and then the tone changes. And we'll go into tones at a later date. Does that help with level? And why we have to understand not only the level we're going to apply, but the level we are applying to. We have questions?
How can, if you want to keep it like medium brown, say you want to keep it like a 4 or even a 5, how would you, like not get it darker about, you see what I'm saying?
Yes, and that goes to according to what type of hair color are we going to use. Are we going to use semi-permanent or permanent? You're going to use permanent. I would back off to a 6 or a 7. And I didn't want to go into that with this lecture today, but anytime a question comes up, I think right then is probably the time to answer it. This poor book, you can tell it's been used a lot. And it's going to be hard to see, but it actually gives you a formulation of how to go from one to the other. It'll show you the natural level that the hair is, the target level, and tell you how to mix it. You get down here with this particular color, if they are a 4 or less, you've got to use a pre-lightener. We haven't been into lighteners yet. But you've got to remove their color and then come back and put this on there. So we will definitely go there at a later date, in depth. Do I have any other questions? All right. Thank you.